Hello, I'm Carrie O'Shea Gorgon, and this is Appfire Presents, the best IT service management show by Appfire. I'm here with Rachel Wright, and we're going to address the question, how are service workflows different from other software and business workflows? Rachel's an entrepreneur, process engineer, and Atlassian Certified Jira Admin. She wrote the Jira Strategy Admin Workbook and the Ultimate Guide to Jira Migrations. And right now, Rachel's at work on the Ultimate Guide to Powering Up Your Service Desk, which is due out in January 2023. So the question today, how are service workflows different from other software and business workflows? Stick around for 10 minutes of ITSM awesome.
Appfire Presents, the best ITSM show by Appfire.
Rachel, thanks so much for joining. So tell us, how are service workflows different from other kinds of software and business workflows?
Sure. Well, think about what happens in customer service when you make a phone call or when you go to return that item at the store. So for me, I'm used to development workflows, right? And they're somewhat linear, right? In a development workflow, you get the assignment, you review it for understanding. Maybe you write up some use cases or some user stories. You write the code, you upload the code, check it in, you test it, you upload it to production and rinse and repeat, right? But with customer service workflows, they're not always linear, right? There's a lot of back and forth. So for example, you make that call and you're calling a vendor and well, they need to get back to you because they have to go check with their vendor. Or maybe there's another person that needs to be involved at your company or outside your company. So I like to think of support workflows as more as something that doesn't necessarily follow a prescribed path. In the perfect world, you get the question, you answer the question, and life would be wonderful for the customer. But that doesn't always happen.
I mean, it'd be wonderful for everybody involved, but so you need to make allowances then for the involvement of multiple people, any of whom might have a question or issue of their own.
Right. And also like skipping steps in the normal process, right? If it's a quick question, maybe you don't need to go through the whole process. Or if it's a huge request that requires like multiple levels of approval. So you have to kind of be aware of what other paths might people take and build in flexibility for them to be able to jump around and skip around if they need to.
So how do you figure out what paths they're currently taking? Like how do you do kind of an audit of the journey as it exists today?
Well, one thing I like to do before I build anything in Jira, especially workflows, is write it out on paper. Talk to the people who are going to be actually using this thing and figure out what their real life process is. Um, Fixing something on paper is infinitely easier than trying to fix it in an application, right? So get it right on paper first. And then don't forget to think about like what are some scenarios where this request might be escalated or de-escalated or something different has to happen, right? Try to think of all those scenarios and build for it. And of course, new ones will come up too. But that's natural as your company grows and your application grows with the organization.
Like you think that it's resolved, but then a comment comes back that's something other than just thanks. Now maybe it's not closed and it needs to automatically reopen, something like that.
Sure, sure. Or anything like that. I think I've used this example before, but a lot of us will say thank you after the customer service representative finishes our request, and that automatically reopens the issue. So lately, I've been not saying thank you when I ask my vendors for something, in case they have some automation that's going to be like, oh, the customer opened the issue again, and they really don't need it. It just says have a nice
Rude.
day, and I'm like, oh, I know. So I've been rude lately, but I try to think of what is their experience when I'm their customer, and I try not to make those agents' lives harder.
No, that makes sense. So you mentioned approvals. Is that something, I mean, we have obviously in every kind of business workflow approvals. Can you, in this context of service, build in like thresholds after which you need to get approval and below which you don't? Stuff like that.
Absolutely. And it's up to your organization if you automate those or not, or if they're just like a business rule within your organization that people know. But that's easy to build in Jira Service Management. Um, and also, one thing I like to do with transitions. is make them global. And of course, global transitions have positives and negatives, but in a workflow that's less linear, it's just the easiest way to allow people to jump to the status they need to be in without a whole lot of bottlenecks created.
What's a global transition? It sounds very exciting.
I thought you might ask that. So it's a transition where you can go from one status to any other status instead of linear. Like you can only go from status one to status two. With the global transition, you can go from status one to status three, skipping status two.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so there's a couple of reasons that I feel like that would be beneficial. One is you might have like a really experienced user who actually does know what the problem is. That doesn't happen a lot, but it happens. So maybe you can skip like one or two kind of preliminary steps, you like clear your cache because you know that they're more
Absolutely. Yeah.
experienced. It saves you time on the
Oh,
other end
right.
too, trying to service the problem. You're not going through unnecessary steps. So better for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a better experience. And like you mentioned earlier with the approvals, if you know approval isn't needed because this is just a tiny little request, you can skip the whole step and not even deal with it. So you could also create transitions that actually are just skips, but it's easier to maintain if it's global. It's just one transition ID on every step instead of individual transitions on every step.
So in your view then, the main difference between service workflows and other kinds of business workflows is just how kind of a mess it is, like how nonlinear it is. That's how you said it.
Yeah, I always say that, if your company is a mess outside of Jira, it's probably going to be a mess inside of Jira too. So I think it's really important to take some time and focus on improving your practices, which will improve outcomes, and then try to make it work well in Jira, right? But if you don't have a good process before, no software tool is going to fix that or help that.
You mentioned starting with a piece of paper, which is great because it's so much easier to correct than code. But what if you already have some stuff in place and you need to figure out what's happening and where you can improve it? Then what's the best approach?
It kind of depends on, is it a procedural problem or is it a problem with the way the workflow is built or maybe some requirements in the workflow. But, take a couple steps back, document what you're doing today, go interview all the stakeholders, see how that matches up to their real life process and reality. Like pretend they don't have any software. They're doing this like, a whiteboard and carrier pigeons, right? How would they do it then? And what is the optimal way to do it?
So you heard it here first. It's the difference between service workflows and other kinds of workflows. Rachel, thank you so much for joining. If you'd like to see more episodes of the best ITSM show by Appfire, many of which do feature Rachel Wright, you can find those at hub.appfire.com. And also keep an eye out for Rachel's guide to powering up your service desk, which is going to be coming out in January of 2023. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.